There is a place, somewhere beyond the ordinary shipping routes of the North Atlantic, that appears on old maritime charts as nothing more than a small, nameless island. But according to a handful of weathered records, that island once held an entire town. A church, a school, a harbor, homes, and nearly 300 people. The strange part is not that the town was abandoned. The strange part is that, according to the story, the town disappeared in a single night. No mass grave was ever found. No wreckage was discovered offshore. There were no bodies, no evacuation records, no newspaper report describing hundreds of missing people. And most disturbing of all, the island itself seemed to become almost impossible to find. Years later, sailors who claimed to have reached the location described seeing something that should not have existed there at all. A church bell ringing in the fog, smoke rising from empty houses, and, on one occasion, a man's voice coming through a radio channel that had been silent for more than half a century. The message contained only 6 words: "Please don't let us leave again." Whether those words were real, misunderstood, or part of a legend that grew darker with every retelling remains impossible to prove. But the story of Blackwater Island begins with something far more ordinary: a map. In the late 19th century, Atlantic navigation was still dangerous enough that captains depended heavily on hand-drawn charts, lighthouse reports, weather observations, and information passed from one vessel to another. Small islands could be poorly surveyed, rock formations could be mistaken for land, fog could distort distances, and an inaccurate chart could send a ship directly toward disaster. It was during this era that several sailors reportedly began describing a peculiar island several dozen miles from the normal coastal routes. They called it Blackwater Island. The name did not appear consistently on official maps. Some charts showed nothing. Others marked a small landmass with a warning symbol. One surviving style account described the island as unfit for anchorage. Another supposedly warned sailors not to approach its western shore after sunset. At first, there was nothing supernatural about these warnings. The island was surrounded by violent currents. Dense fog frequently formed around it. The coastline was steep and rocky. Landing a small boat there would have been dangerous. Yet sometime around the 1880s, a small settlement allegedly appeared on the island. Its residents were believed to be fishermen, farmers, boat builders, and families who wanted to escape the increasingly crowded coastal towns of mainland America. They built wooden houses near a sheltered bay. A small church stood on the highest point of the settlement. A schoolhouse was constructed nearby. There was even a crude wooden pier extending into the harbor. For several years, life on Blackwater Island was reportedly uneventful. Fishing boats came and went. Children attended school. Families cultivated small gardens. The island had everything a small 19th century settlement needed. But according to later accounts, the residents gradually began noticing something strange. Animals behaved differently. Dogs refused to approach certain parts of the island. Birds sometimes disappeared from the sky when fog surrounded the settlement. Fishermen claimed that compasses behaved unpredictably near the western cliffs, and some residents began reporting the same dream. They dreamed of walking through the village at night. Every house was empty, every door was open, and from the church at the top of the hill came the sound of a bell. But there was no one inside the church. Then, according to the legend, came the event that changed everything. One autumn evening, a fishing boat approached the island.
The crew expected to see lights from the settlement. Instead, the entire shoreline was dark. The captain assumed the residents had gone to sleep early, but as the boat moved closer, something seemed wrong. There were no lanterns, no voices, no dogs barking, no movement along the pier. The harbor looked abandoned. Yet smoke was reportedly rising from several chimneys. The fishermen decided not to land. They turned the boat around and returned to the mainland. The following morning, another vessel was sent to investigate. This time, the crew went ashore. What they found became the foundation of the Blackwater Island mystery. The houses were still there. Furniture remained inside. Food had been reportedly left on tables. Clothes were hanging beside fireplaces. Tools remained scattered across workshops. The schoolhouse contained books. The church bell rope was still hanging from the ceiling. But every person was gone. Not one resident remained. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of a storm destroying the town, no burned buildings, no abandoned boats floating offshore. It was as if the entire population had simply stood up and walked away at exactly the same moment. And then the investigators discovered something even stranger. On the wall inside the church was a sentence scratched into the wood. Only 7 words. "We heard the bell before it rang." Nobody could explain what it meant, and nobody knew who had written it. For decades, the island would remain one of the strangest stories ever associated with the North Atlantic. But if Blackwater Island was merely an abandoned settlement, why did the people leave everything behind? And where did nearly 300 people go? The answer may have been buried somewhere beneath the island, because years after the disappearance, someone found a sealed entrance beneath the church, and behind that entrance was something the original settlers apparently discovered long before they vanished. Something that may have explained why they were so afraid of the island. Something that was never supposed to be opened.
The entrance beneath the church was not discovered by the original investigators. It was found almost 40 years later. By then, Blackwater Island had become little more than a forgotten name. Most modern charts showed nothing unusual in the area. Fishermen rarely traveled there, and the few who did usually avoided the rocky western side of the island. But in the winter of 1927, a violent storm pushed a small coastal vessel far from its intended route. The captain later claimed that through a break in the fog, he saw a faint light on the island. That should have been impossible. The settlement had supposedly been abandoned for decades. Yet the light appeared to come from the hill where the old church stood. The captain anchored offshore and sent 2 men toward the island. They returned less than an hour later. Neither man wanted to explain what they had seen. According to the account, one of them simply kept repeating the same sentence, "There is someone inside." The captain refused to investigate further. The ship left before sunrise. For several years, the story was forgotten. Then, in the early 1930s, a group of researchers interested in abandoned coastal settlements reportedly visited the island. Their goal was simple: document what remained of the old village before erosion destroyed it completely. At first, their expedition seemed ordinary. They photographed the ruins, they mapped the shoreline, they recorded the remains of wooden houses. But when they reached the church, one researcher noticed something unusual. The floor beneath the altar sounded hollow. The men removed several damaged boards. Underneath was a layer of stone. Beneath the stone was a narrow opening, and behind the opening was a staircase.
The staircase descended directly into the ground. Nobody knew how deep it went. The researchers brought lanterns and began climbing downward. The air became colder with every step. The walls were not made from ordinary wooden supports. They were constructed from carefully fitted stone blocks. That immediately raised an important question. Who had built the chamber? The settlement itself was relatively young. The church was believed to have been constructed in the late 19th century, but the underground masonry looked much older. Some of the stones appeared weathered beyond anything the researchers expected. At the bottom of the staircase, they found a narrow corridor. On both sides were small rooms. The first room contained wooden crates. The second was empty. The third contained dozens of glass bottles. Some were broken, others remained sealed. The labels had faded so badly that almost nothing could be read. Then they found the fourth room. It contained a table. On the table were notebooks. Most had been destroyed by moisture, but several pages remained readable. The handwriting belonged to different people. Some entries appeared to have been written by settlers. Others seemed much older. One entry described a strange sound coming from beneath the island. Another mentioned lights appearing offshore. Another warned that the western cliffs should never be approached during fog. But one sentence appeared again and again: "Do not answer the bell." The researchers initially assumed it was superstition. Then they reached the final chamber. The room was almost perfectly circular. At its center was a stone structure resembling a well, but there was no water inside. Instead, the bottom appeared to disappear into complete darkness. The researchers lowered a lantern. The light vanished before reaching the bottom. They lowered a rope. The rope continued downward, then stopped. The depth was never properly recorded, but what happened next terrified the expedition. One researcher reportedly heard a faint metallic sound, a bell. The sound came from somewhere beneath them. The men froze. There was no church bell ringing above. The church was several levels higher. Yet the sound was unmistakable. A single deep strike, then another, then silence. They climbed out of the chamber immediately. Before leaving the island, they sealed the entrance. At least, that is what the surviving account claims. But the mystery did not end there. Several years later, a fisherman reportedly discovered the entrance open again, and this time there was something inside the church that had not been there before. A chair, a simple wooden chair. It had been placed directly in front of the altar. Nobody knew who put it there. Then came the most disturbing discovery. Written across the church floor in chalk were 3 words: "They are waiting." By the middle of the 20th century, stories about Blackwater Island had become almost impossible to separate from folklore. Some claimed the settlers had discovered an underground cave. Others believed the island had been used by smugglers. A few suggested that an old military installation had once existed beneath the church. But none of these explanations answered the central question: where did the town go? If nearly 300 people disappeared, there should have been evidence: graves, bones, boats, personal belongings, something. But investigators found almost nothing. Then, in 1961, a retired radio operator reportedly came forward with a story that changed the mystery completely. He claimed that during the summer of 1913, while monitoring maritime radio traffic, he received a strange transmission. The signal was weak, the voice sounded distant, but the operator believed he heard a man speaking. The man said that a storm had trapped them on an island. He gave the name Blackwater. The operator attempted to respond, No answer came. Then, several minutes later, the voice returned. This time, it sounded frightened. The message was short. "We can see the mainland." The operator asked how far away they were. The response came immediately. "Very close." Then the voice whispered something else, something the operator never forgot. "But the water won't let us cross." The signal disappeared. No ship matching the description was reported missing that night. No rescue operation was launched, and there was no confirmed evidence that the transmission had ever existed. But the story created a new possibility. Perhaps the settlers had not died. Perhaps they were trapped. And perhaps the island itself was not the real mystery. Maybe something about the surrounding water prevented people from leaving. There was one final clue. A damaged journal discovered decades later contained a crude drawing of the island. Around it were circles, dozens of them. At the center was the village. Underneath was a single sentence: "The island is not surrounded by water." The meaning of those words would remain unknown for years, until an oceanographer examining the area discovered something unusual beneath the seabed. A geological formation unlike anything expected there. And deep beneath that formation was a massive hollow space, a natural chamber, large enough, according to preliminary estimates, to extend beneath almost the entire island. Suddenly, the old stories about underground sounds, disappearing lights, strange compass readings, and the vanished settlement no longer seemed completely impossible. But the discovery created an even darker question. If the island contained a vast underground chamber, what had been living inside it before the settlers arrived? And why did the missing residents seem to know about it?
For decades, the mystery of Blackwater Island remained trapped between two worlds. To some people, it was nothing more than an old maritime legend. To others, it was evidence of something that had never been properly explained. But in the summer of 1974, the island was visited by a small research team whose findings would make the story even stranger. The team was not searching for ghosts. They were studying the geology of the surrounding seabed. Sonar technology had improved dramatically by that time, allowing researchers to map underwater formations that earlier expeditions could never have seen. And almost immediately, they noticed something unusual. Beneath the island was a large network of cavities. Some were natural. Others appeared strangely symmetrical. The researchers initially assumed they were tunnels created by erosion, but then the sonar detected something that looked almost like a vertical shaft. It extended downward from the western side of the island. The team decided to investigate. They reached the shoreline by boat and carried equipment toward the old settlement. The village was almost completely consumed by vegetation. Trees had grown through collapsed roofs. The wooden pier had disappeared. Only portions of the church remained standing. But when the researchers entered the building, they discovered something that should not have been there. The underground entrance was open. Again. No lock had been broken. No tools were found nearby. The wooden boards that had supposedly sealed the opening decades earlier were simply gone. The team descended. This time, they brought cameras. The staircase led to the circular chamber described in earlier accounts. But the chamber looked different. The stone well in the center was no longer empty. There was water inside. Black, perfectly still water. One researcher lowered a measuring device. It continued downward, 10 feet, 20, 30. Then the cable suddenly went slack. The device
had disappeared. They tried again. The same thing happened. At that point, the team decided not to continue. They turned back, but before they reached the staircase, one of the researchers heard something behind them, a human voice. He turned around. Nobody was there. Then another voice came from the darkness. This time, everyone heard it. It sounded like a woman. She said one word: "Help." The team immediately climbed out of the chamber. They spent the night on the boat. At sunrise, they returned to the mainland. Their official report focused on geology. The underground chamber was described as a naturally formed cavern system. The strange sounds were attributed to echoes, shifting rock, or air movement. Nothing supernatural was mentioned. But one researcher reportedly refused to sign the final report. Years later, he explained why. He believed the voices were not echoes. He believed they were recordings, not recordings made by machines, recordings somehow preserved inside the cave itself. His theory sounded impossible, but another discovery would make it even harder to dismiss. In 1988, a private collector acquired a box of documents from the estate of a former coastal surveyor. Inside the box was an old photograph. The photograph showed the Blackwater Island settlement before its disappearance. There were houses, the church, the harbor, and dozens of people standing outside the buildings. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then, the collector noticed something else. The photograph contained far more people than the settlement was supposed to have. Not hundreds, but perhaps 40 or 50 figures. The strange part was that many of them appeared blurred. Not because the photograph was damaged. Their faces were simply unclear, almost as if they were moving. The collector enlarged the image. In the background, near the church, stood a group of men. One of them appeared to be looking directly toward the camera. The face was recognizable. It belonged to a man who supposedly disappeared with the rest of the island's population. But according to the photograph's date, the picture had been taken 3 years after the town vanished. That should have been impossible. The collector began searching for more information. He discovered another document, a handwritten passenger list from a coastal vessel. It contained several names that matched families believed to have lived on Blackwater Island. The names were dated years after the disappearance. Had some of the residents survived? Had they escaped? Or had somebody deliberately created false records to hide what happened? There was no clear answer. Then came the most disturbing piece of evidence: a letter. It apparently was written by a woman named Eleanor Voss, one of the island's school teachers. The letter was dated only days before the town disappeared. She described strange behavior among the residents. People were hearing bells at night. Children claimed they saw figures standing along the shoreline. Fishermen refused to go west, and several families had begun packing their belongings. But Eleanor believed the danger was not outside the village. She believed it was beneath them. Her final paragraph contained a warning. "We thought the island was hiding something from us. We were wrong. It was keeping something from getting out." That sentence changed the interpretation of the entire story. Maybe the settlers had not discovered a curse. Maybe they had discovered a containment system. Something had been sealed underground, and perhaps the disappearance happened because that seal failed. But there was still no explanation for where the residents went until 1999. That year, a documentary crew traveled to the approximate location of Blackwater Island. They weren't expecting to find anything. Modern navigation charts did not clearly identify an island at the coordinates described in the old documents. Yet, during a period of unusually dense fog, the crew's sonar detected shallow water where the chart showed deep ocean. The captain slowed the vessel. A shape appeared through the fog. Land. The island was there. The crew began filming. For several hours, they moved along the shoreline. They found the remains of the old settlement. The church tower was still visible. Several stone foundations remained. And then, the fog became strangely still. The wind stopped. The ocean surface became almost completely flat. The crew's radio began to produce static. Then a voice came through. A man's voice, weak, distorted, but understandable. "Can you hear us?" The crew immediately responded. "Who is this?" Silence. Then the voice returned. "We've been here since the town disappeared." The crew asked where they were. The response came after several seconds. "Under the church." Then the radio went dead. The documentary crew left the island before nightfall. The footage was reportedly never publicly released. Whether that claim is true is impossible to establish. But the story created a final possibility. Perhaps the island's greatest secret was never meant to be found. Perhaps the missing town had not been destroyed. Perhaps its people had entered the underground chambers voluntarily. Maybe they believed they were escaping something, or perhaps they had been forced underground. And if the voice was genuine, one question remained. Why would people who had supposedly disappeared more than a century earlier still be asking for help? The answer may lie in the final expedition to Blackwater Island, because in 2011, researchers returned with equipment capable of entering the underground system. They found something beneath the island that changed the story forever. A tunnel, a door, and behind that door, evidence that someone had been living there long after the town disappeared.
In 2011, the Blackwater Island mystery finally attracted the attention of a modern scientific expedition. Unlike the earlier investigators, this team arrived with advanced sonar equipment, ground-penetrating instruments, remotely operated cameras, and geological mapping technology. They were not looking for ghosts. They were looking for an explanation. The expedition began with the underground chamber beneath the ruined church. A small robotic camera was lowered through the opening. For several minutes, nothing appeared on the monitor except darkness and wet stone. Then the camera moved deeper. The walls changed. Natural rock gave way to smooth stone. The tunnel became almost perfectly straight. And then the camera reached a door. It was not wooden. It was made from thick metal. There was no visible handle, no writing, no obvious mechanism. But directly above it was a symbol carved into the stone. The same symbol appeared in several of the old documents connected to Blackwater Island. The researchers immediately stopped the camera. Nobody wanted to open the door without knowing what was behind it. Instead, they scanned the area. The results were astonishing. Beyond the door was a large underground cavity. It appeared to extend beneath a significant portion of the island. There were multiple chambers connected by narrow tunnels. But the most unusual discovery was that some of the chambers contained objects. Metal structures, wooden platforms, fragments of glass, and what appeared to be old human-made equipment. The equipment was impossible to identify with certainty. Some researchers believed it could have been part of an old industrial operation. Others suggested it might have been related to mining.
That explanation would have made sense, except for one problem. There was no evidence of a mine, no extraction shafts, no mineral deposits large enough to justify the construction. The researchers eventually reached the conclusion that the underground structure was probably a combination of natural caves and human modifications. But who had modified them, and why? Then, the robotic camera entered another chamber. The floor was covered with debris. Among the debris were wooden objects, a broken chair, a child's toy, a rusted lantern, and several books. The camera moved closer. One of the books was opened by the robot's mechanical arm. Most of the pages had dissolved, but several pages remained. The writing was faded, yet one line was visible. "They have started calling our names." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then the camera detected movement. Something crossed the far end of the chamber. The team initially assumed it was a mechanical artifact. The camera operator rewound the footage. The movement appeared again. A human-shaped figure seemed to pass between two stone columns. The team checked the chamber's temperature. There was no indication of another person being present. They checked the camera. No malfunction. They sent the robot farther inside. The figure never appeared again. The expedition ended shortly afterward. The researchers concluded that the island contained an extensive cave system with historical occupation. Nothing more. No evidence of a supernatural phenomenon. No proof that hundreds of people had vanished. No confirmation that anyone lived underground for generations. And that should have been the end of the story. But one detail remained unexplained: the original settlement. If hundreds of people had disappeared, where were their remains? Modern archaeological surveys found no mass burial, no shipwreck large enough to carry the population away, no evidence of a catastrophic fire, and no obvious evacuation route. There are several realistic possibilities. Perhaps the population gradually abandoned the island. Perhaps disease, famine, or a violent storm forced them away. Perhaps the settlement was never as large as later stories claimed. Perhaps the documents were misinterpreted. Or perhaps several unrelated events were combined over generations until they became one terrifying legend. There is another possibility, a simpler one. Human memory is unreliable. When a place becomes isolated, abandoned, and surrounded by mystery, stories can grow faster than facts. A missing fisherman becomes a vanished family. A ruined building becomes a cursed town. A strange sound inside a cave becomes a voice from the dead. And an abandoned island becomes a place where an entire city supposedly disappeared. But there is still one problem: the island itself. Modern navigation systems can locate it. Satellites can photograph it. Researchers can map its coastline. So the idea that the island literally disappears is almost certainly a myth. Yet old sailors may have had a very different experience. Dense Atlantic fog can reduce visibility to almost nothing. Strong currents can push vessels far from their intended course. Temperature differences can create unusual atmospheric conditions, and rocky islands can become invisible from only a few miles away. To a sailor navigating with 19th century instruments, an island appearing suddenly through the fog could seem almost supernatural. There is also a scientific explanation for strange sounds. Underground cavities can amplify and distort noises. Ocean waves entering narrow rock formations can produce low-frequency sounds that travel surprisingly far. Wind moving through cracks can create tones resembling whistles, voices, or bells. And human brains naturally search for familiar patterns. A random sound becomes a voice, a shadow becomes a person, a distant light becomes a signal. That does not mean every story about Blackwater Island is true, but it also does not mean every story is meaningless, because beneath the legend lies a real lesson about history. Thousands of settlements have disappeared from the American landscape. Some were abandoned because industries failed. Others were destroyed by storms, fires, disease, economic collapse, or changing transportation routes. Some communities were simply forgotten. Their buildings disappeared, their names vanished from maps, their people moved somewhere else, and eventually, only fragments remained. Blackwater Island may belong to that category, a forgotten settlement transformed into a mystery, a dangerous coastline transformed into a cursed island, an underground cave transformed into a gateway, and missing records transformed into a disappearance involving hundreds of people. But there is still one question that refuses to disappear. Why did multiple generations of witnesses describe the same strange details? The bells, the fog, the underground chambers, the lights, the voices, the feeling that something beneath the island was waiting. Maybe those details were invented, maybe they were exaggerations, or perhaps they were based on something real that nobody ever fully understood. The last known survey of the island recorded no permanent residents. The church was collapsing, the old homes were gone, the harbor had almost completely disappeared beneath the waves. Nature was slowly reclaiming everything the settlers had built. And somewhere beneath the island, the old tunnels remained, empty, silent, waiting. Or perhaps there was never anything there at all. Maybe the greatest mystery of Blackwater Island is not what happened to the people. Maybe it's how easily an incomplete history can become a legend. A handful of old documents, a ruined settlement, a dangerous ocean, a forgotten cave, and hundreds of unanswered questions. Put them together, and you get a story that sounds impossible. But that's exactly why stories like this survive. Because the ocean is full of places we have never completely understood. And history is full of people whose final moments were never recorded. So the next time you see an old island marked on a forgotten map, remember this: the most frightening places are not always the ones hiding monsters. Sometimes